Hello, this is Steven Hour. Yes, we are back with another top 10 video, and today I'll be doing my top 10 favorite rogues galleries of all time. This is a list I've been really looking forward to do because I always love villains. They're some of the most interesting characters no matter what form of media. And because of that, I decided I am going to look at the 10 very best rogues galleries. Now, I also want to clarify something. Everything here, it's off limits. I'm not just focusing on comic book rogues galleries. I'm looking at everything from movies, TV shows, cartoons, comic strips, you name it. I'm taking everything into consideration and looking at the best rogues galleries and how fun and interesting they all are. But before we get into the top 10, let's get into our honorable mention. The honorable mention for this video goes to the Scooby-Doo monsters from the entire Scooby-Doo franchise. From Scooby-Doo Where Are You in the late 60s all the way up to the present. Scooby-Doo, for those of you who don't know Scooby-Doo, why haven't you heard of them or heard of him? Basically, Scooby-Doo revolves around a dog named, well, Scooby-Doo, along with 4 teenagers, Shaggy, Velma, the brains, Daphne, the pretty one, and Fred, the leader. But basically, they go around solving mysteries involving essentially monsters. But it turns out that these so-called monsters or ghosts were actually people dressed up in essentially monster costumes in order to achieve whatever criminal end they were, whether it was to be rich or just some big scheme. Now, the reason why I'm including this as an honorable mention, they're very silly. They can be, now, the Scooby-Doo monsters range in that department. They could be silly or threatening. But the one thing I can't deny is that they always have an interesting and unique design. Some may be generic, some are definitely unique and interesting. And the villains usually range from being just guys in costumes to occasions where we actually see actual supernatural creatures. But with that, they are at an honorable mention because in reality, the others I've always had a far better soft spot for and found them to be the most interesting villains I've seen ever. So as a result, these guys are an honorable mention. Anyway, with that, let's get into the top 10. Kicking off at number 10 goes to Dick Tracy's Gangsters. Now, for those of you who've always seen my channel know I'm quite a bit of a fan of Dick Tracy. Others who are probably surprised and don't even know about this character. Well, first off, Dick Tracy is essentially a detective. And he's not a comic book character. He actually got his start in comic strips before eventually becoming a comic book character. And basically, Dick Tracy is a detective who goes up against his city's most infamous gangsters, who, of course, their names are a reflection of their disfigurements. They're these gangsters with disfigurements, and how could I not like those types of characters? But also, Dick Tracy does not goes against gangsters or professional criminals. He also has gone up against Nazi spies. Again, some of these characters are some of the most interesting because they just look so bizarre. Gangsters like Flat Top, Itchy, Mumbles, Prune Face, The Brow, Shoulders, you name it. They are all just bizarre looking, and that's the appeal, that these gangsters just looked absolutely like they should not really belong. Like, they just don't look normal, and that's the beauty of it, because again, the comic strips they're from, there's no real thing. Chester Gould, the person who was really responsible for doing the comic strips, the design of the characters, have really created some very interesting characters. And of course, Dick Tracy is now such a pop cult, well, a huge character in the comic strip world, but for modern audiences, he's kind of lost out of favor and is really an old school reference that only old school people would really know. Dick Tracy's world is bizarre and strange, and I love it. And the gangsters are what makes them work. The reason why these guys were at number 10 is because other characters have either evolved or have more dimension to them. These guys are kind of two-dimensional. They're just pretty much gangsters with a disfigurement, and that's it. And I can't really put them up further when knowing that that's that. But they are there, and they are really some interesting characters. Number 9. The Kim Possible's Rogues Gallery. I told you I was not focusing on comic book characters. I'm taking everything in consideration, including some cartoon shows. In the TV show, Kim Possible is a high school student, and of course, if you know, I've done the review of the TV series somewhere on my channel. If you haven't had a look at it, give it a watch. But basically, Kim Possible is a high school student by day, and essentially a crime fighter trying to save the world. The TV show was a combination of the teen dramas, but also some comic book elements and spy elements to create a fun, action-packed comedy. And it's so fun, and I love the villains. Dr. Draken, voiced by John DiMaggio, is obviously the main series standout, but other villains have also been fun. Senor Senior Senior, Senor Senior Junior, Monkey Fist, Duff Killigan, Professor Dementor, Motor Ed, and of course, Shigo. Like I said, so many great villains here. All are fun, but they're also so fitting and manage to fit so well with this Rogues Gallery. With this, series, and the Rogues Gallery just amplifies that. It's I really don't know how to really say it, but I think I'll find these villains, they can be funny, they can be serious, and they can be a blend of between. And that's what I like. They manage to go into all sorts of that. And also, how they interact with their hero is really interesting. Especially with Kim and sidekick Ron Stoppable, who half of them, if barely any of them, except for maybe 2, or 3 actually, know Ron's actual name. The rest just call the sidekick or that weird one. All fun and interesting. I've always had a soft spot for the show, and of course I've loved these villains as a kid, so of course they're gonna be not just on the list, but they will know where they were gonna be on the 10th spot. But looking at other shows and other Rogues Galleries, I can't really say. I can say that they would have gone down, because honestly, if I did this 7 years ago, this would have been easily in the top 3. But looking at other Rogues Galleries, they kind of gone down to the 9th spot. And I understand that this is what I've done because I admit the others are just so better, and I've grown to like their Rogues Galleries more than this one. But at least it beats out number 10, and I can at least feel some in that. These villains are definitely some of the funniest I've seen. Number 8. DuckTales Adversaries. Now, if I'm being subjectively honest, the DuckTales Rogues Gallery Adversaries I'm more referring to is to the reboot that happened in 2017. For those of you who've never seen DuckTales, both the reboot or the original, but basically the same premise follows, so the reboot is really tells more creative and interesting stories, and definitely fleshes out the characters more than the original. Basically, DuckTales is about a billionaire duck, or millionaire duck, depends on what you read, by the name of Scrooge McDuck, who essentially is this richest duck ever, and he and his nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, along with his friends and family, go on these adventures, solving mysteries and rewriting history. What I like about these villains is, again, they're kind of like Kim Possible. They both blend into being serious, funny, and action, but they're not two-dimensional. Some of them have a lot of character, especially with guys like Floris Glumgold, Magica the Spell. But most importantly, I think the real main villains that really grab my attention is the evil organization FOUL, led by Bradford, and its many operatives, all either have a run-in or a past with Scrooge McDuck, or are just fan favorites from the original either DuckTales TV show or Darkwing Duck, which of course Darkwing Duck is getting a reboot, and I do plan to watch that later in the future if it ever does come to light. I like these because honestly, there's more to the character than what you would expect, but over time they develop. I can't really say the Kim Possible Rogues Gallery, and definitely not the Dick Tracy Rogues Gallery, ever really developed to being more than dimensional characters. But I will admit, it's the Rogues Gallery here is silly. But then again, the Rogues Gallery fits their show, so I can't really say that they're bad villains. I also like how some of them are like homages to stuff. Magic the Spell is feels like an homage to old sorcerers. The FOUL organization and its leaders and its top operatives reminds me so much of Bond and the Spectre organization. Others are funny as hell and more dimensional. There's so much to their villain characters. It's so great. But they don't go further up because I feel they could have been developed more. Sadly, the DuckTales series have ended after 3 seasons. It's a real shame because it's actually a really good season and it should have had more time to really be explored than its 3 seasons. But hey, 3 seasons is enough and 3 seasons of worthwhile adventuring. Give the show a watch, especially for its rogues gallery. I'm specifically talking about the reboot. Coming in at number 7. The Mafia video game series. I told you I was not limiting this to comic books, and I decided to at least give a shout out to a video game series for their rogues gallery. But I'll be honest, I'm not that huge in video games, so I really had to think of a really good rogues gallery to really be. I was thinking of the GTA games, but to be honest, I've never really played the GTA games. And so really, the only really game franchise that I've really played, at least, well, maybe with the exception of the Batman Arkham video games, and even the first Insomniac Spider-Man video game, the real ones where I've honestly played all 3 and enjoyed the most out of playing them would be the Mafia video games. For those of you who, just like the previous ones, don't even know what I'm talking about, the Mafia video game series is basically you get to play as the video game's protagonist gangster. For the first 2, it's Italian Americans, and the third one, African American. Each game sets place in a different time period, and your character essentially rises up the ranks to become a notorious criminal within your said city. What I like it now, the video games, again, Mafia, name is clearly derived from the old school mafiosos, particularly the Americans mafiosos, or La Cosa Nostra, as a gangster turned preacher on YouTube would constantly tell that that's what they refer to themselves as, never the Mafia. Basically, in your game, you get to pretty much interact with many of these gangsters. Some are your enemies, others are your allies, and some, in cases, become your allies, then enemies, or reverse, or vice versa. What I like this rogues gallery does share in common with Dick Tracy. They're a bunch rogues gallery, and the fact they're a bunch of gangsters. But the difference is these are more real, but despite that, they still have some character development that makes them stand out. But also, because each video game takes place in certain time periods, the gangsters are molded to fit within that time period. In the first Mafia game, it's pretty much during the in the 30s, which is the Great Depression, but also the last years of Prohibition, which of course is pretty much where the gangsters were really, big. The second, Mafia 2, takes place in the late 40s and early 50s, just at the end of post-World War II, and the early 50s, where really organized crime really began to become more structured and more influential. Mafia 3 takes place in the late 60s, particularly, however, unlike what these are in the big cities, Detroit is a big city, but it's more like the southern states. Basically, the city is more based on New Orleans, and you get these more civil rights movements at the time, and basically how the times were changing, and this more equality word was really being thrown around more in the late 60s than it was in the previous decades. Again, I like it because each gangster is fitted to fit within that time period, in their certain time period. Each has a different visual design that makes them not just only stand out, but don't feel like we're carbon copying each other. Each gangster has a unique image, but of course it's not as silly as Dick Tracy's, but it's more realistic in a way. And the voice cast for many of these gangsters are so fun, and many do come from different backgrounds. While the majority of these gangsters you go up in the series are Italian, you do get to go up against a few Jewish, and even in the Mafia 3, you get to go up against a few rednecks and southern gentleman types. Again, each different, each fantastic. But I give it at number 7 because, honestly, when you think of really main villains, you don't really think of this video game series, but then again, it's not your typical video game series. But I give it a number 7, and I absolutely love the villains and all the bosses we get to go up against in this series. If you haven't played these games, give them a go. I really feel you will enjoy them. Number 6. I get a tie here. We're going with X-Men and Captain America. Now, okay, first off, let's explain. The X-Men series are basically about what essentially are mutants. These essentially are people born with human abilities, but become outcasts because they're considered freaks because of their abilities are considered unnatural and not human. Again, the series, and as a result, the term X-Men is the superhero team of mutants who go battling against these evil mutants. Well, and it does have a bit of a political thing. This was based on the Malcolm X movements during that time period. But I like that essentially, even though these mutants are freaks, they are deep down human. And are genuinely I feel genuinely sympathetic to these characters. They don't deserve to be treated outcasted by society because of the way they look. Each bring a unique and different element, and I like how the villains really exemplify humanity. Captain America's Rogues Gallery, for those of you who don't know, Captain America, of course, was a superhuman soldier that fought during World War II until eventually during a mission, he gets essentially frozen and essentially is in suspended animation until he is revived in the modern day, and essentially he is a man out of time. His time period he knew is no longer relevant, and he has to try and learn to survive or really learn to live in a completely different time period that is completely foreign to him. And his villains are mostly a bunch of mostly Nazis, or at least people associated with that group. But it's also like these scientists, super soldiers, espionage type characters. Again, the Rogues Galleries to here really fit the type of hero they're going for, or for the X-Men's case, team they're going for. I always liked them. Each are great. Captain America gave us guys like the Red Skull, Baron Zemo, Wolfgang von Strucker, Winter Soldier, Crossbones, Hydra, the organization, and even AIM was actually technically a Captain America villain before they became Iron Man, but they're type of the organization that blends in between. X-Men, we've got guys like Magneto, Mystique, the Juggernaut, Toad, the Blob. So many great villains. All great. And I'm sure I'm missing out a bunch of other names, but each are so great, unique, and stand out in their own way. I could spend nearly an hour talking about each villain and how they interact. And of course, these guys are from Marvel Comics, so they're part of the same comic universe. Each are great and fantastic in their own right, and so fantastic. Number 5. The Star Wars franchise. Okay. Again, I'm not sticking to comic books. I'm taking all forms of media into account. And what comes next has to be the Star Wars franchise. Basically, the Star Wars franchise is basically a soap opera in space, where there's galactic battles and so many interesting characters with diverse from human to droids to even race, and even aliens, a whole bunch of that. Nothing is really constricted down. Many greats, of course, include such as Darth Sidious, General Grievous, Count Dooku, Boba Fett, Jango Fett, Jabba the Hutt, and of course a bunch of Imperial Admirals, Darth Maul. But of course, one of the greatest villains in all of Star Wars, let alone history of cinema, has to be the Lord Vader himself, Darth Vader. One of the most interesting and most complex villains, I must say, in the history of cinema. And again, because these characters are so different and unique, they're not really part of one group, and they're so diverse and explored, they each have unique visual design, so eye-catchy, and each have a different profession. They want to be a ruler of the galaxy, to a simple bounty hunter, crime lord, you name it, or even warmongers. Each great and fantastic in their own right. And I knew I had to give this franchise a shout. It has so many great rogues galleries, and I think in terms of its villains for a movie or for a franchise, both movies, TV shows, you name it, I think only one thing could possibly rival the Star Wars franchise, which leads us to our number 4 spot. The James Bond villains. You knew when I told you I was not going to be including, not on the comic books, I was bringing other villains from other sources of media, you knew the Bond villains were going to be. James Bond is the world's spy, is one of the greatest secret agent spies in probably not only in the history of movies. And what has helped that is the many villains he's gone up against. So many iconics. First off, you have your classic Bond henchmen, Oddjob, Jaws, Red Grant, the femme fatales like Electric King, Xenia Onatopp, Volpe, Mayday, and of course the main villains, Auric Goldfinger, Dr. No, Sanchez, Kananga, Scaramanga, Max Zorin, Le Chiffre, Raul Silva, Alex Trevelyan, and of course, perhaps the most biggest name in the history of cinema, the cat-petting, hidden face, leader of Spectre, Ernst Stavro Blofeld. All are iconic and a parody to this day. Each have, in many ways, some of these villains have inspired so many other villains. They have laid the foundation for some of history's, or cinema's, most alluring antagonists, that we continue to watch these films to see the hero overcome their villain. And the Bond series has given us so many memorable and so many interesting in the series. And some have become either pop culture icons or just mainstays of cinema. I had to give this no way I was not going to pass this up on the list. Honestly, I was tempted to give this the number second spot, but the three more comic rogues galleries made me change my mind. Number 3. Number 3 goes to the Flash's Rogues Gallery. I absolutely love this Rogues Gallery. It has some really great villains. Gorilla Grodd, Earbothon, aka Professor Zoom, or the Reverse Flash, depends on who you ask. The Trickster, Captain Cold, Weather Wizard, Heat Wave, Abracadabra, Top, you name it, a good Rogues Gallery from the Flash's Rogues Gallery. Come from the Flash's Rogues Gallery. I guess I like them because they are colorful. And true, when they started out, they might have been two-dimensional, but over time they developed to be really interesting and different characters, with Captain Cold being my favorite of the lot. I don't know why, but Captain Cold is just a fun character for me, and he's probably when it comes to the Flash's Rogues Gallery, it's Captain Cold that comes to my head first above the rest. All are fun and different in their own right, and they complement the Flash with a more science fiction element to them, but at the same time still feel grounded in their city. And yeah, they're all fun. And I love every one of them. And honestly, I think the Flash's Rogues Gallery, even though it has some metahumans, those that have magical abilities, but a lot of them are also tech-oriented based. Really, but they only stand out of not being really a metahuman or having a sort of tech or gadget, I think has to go to Gorilla Grodd. And he's fun. Absolutely interesting. Number 2. Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery. We're getting close to the number 1. And number 2 goes to Spidey's Rogues Gallery. All really... I don't know how to really explain this. For those who don't know, just like the Flash is a super speedster with dual identity, Spider-Man is the same thing. He has powers too, though not super speed, but he has powers. He can climb up a wall, he has strong, quick reflexes. Basically, he does have some abilities like a spider. But unlike Spider-Man, he's a kid, so he has to balance his crime-fighting life with his school life, and eventually college, and so on. The character slowly evolved, and the villains also commonly fit Spider-Man. Some of them are animal-based, Doc Ock, the Rhino, Scorpion, and you can name a few more. Animal-based. Others are tech-based, like the Shocker, Electro. And some are just bizarre, like the Green Goblin, really being the big example, and even Kraven the Hunter. But Spider-Man also goes up against a large set of gangsters, like the Kingpin, Hammerhead, Tombstone, Silvermane, and Mr. Negative. But Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery is also unique, as it also tends to also blend in with other superheroes, and even some of those said superheroes' Rogues Galleries blends into Spider-Man as well, like Daredevil and the Punisher really being big major examples. I like Spidey's Rogues Gallery because as Spider-Man battles them, it teaches him a lesson where he has to overcome and develop as a person, which is why I like the Spider-Man Rogues Gallery. It develops the hero character. And I think that's what the villains should. They should develop the hero, and really the hero should really learn to overcome obstacles and grow as a person. And that's why I like Spidey's Rogues Gallery. It really impacts the hero to really develop. And I don't think the other villains on this list really did that. And I don't think they ever did. But with that out of the way, there needs to be a number one. And number one is, everyone can agree, perhaps the best Rogues Gallery in the history of villainy goes to Batman's Rogues Gallery. I mean, we all probably knew this before we even bothered to click the video. Batman's Rogues Gallery is not just the best Rogues Gallery in comics, I would say the best Rogues Gallery anywhere. But as we don't know, Batman is essentially a crime-fighting vigilante. At day, he is millionaire Bruce Wayne. At night, he is the Batman, the Dark Knight, the Caped Crusader, the world's greatest detective, going up against his Gotham City's most vile criminals, from the gangsters to the whack jobs that are locked up in Arkham Asylum. Very few of these villains have superpowers. I think the only superpowers villains in the Rogue Gallery are really Clayface, Ra's al Ghul, because he's immortal, and of course Poison Ivy. Others are more whack jobs, like Two-Face, the Joker, the Riddler, Catwoman, Mr. Freeze, I might have mentioned Penguin, Hugo Strange, maybe Bane, Killer Croc, although to be fair they too have superpowers, and so on and so forth. Many of these villains pose a psychological threat to Batman, but also what makes them so unique is that the majority of the rogues share a parallel with Batman, as in they can be also viewed as a dark, twisted version. The Riddler battles Batman on an intellectual level. The Penguin is considered an anti-Bruce Wayne. Two-Face is what happens when two personalities collide. And of course, the Joker is considered the complete opposite. And the Joker is also considered Batman's, not just Batman's greatest villain, but the greatest villain in history. Probably in all the comics, and definitely outside of the comics. And just like I'd say the Flashes, Spider-Man's, Batman's Rogues Gallery 2 has also been interpreted in other media. It's been in cartoons, it's been in movies, it's been in live-action TV shows. Batman's Rogues Gallery truly is the greatest Rogues Gallery in all of fiction. And there we have it. Those are my top 10 greatest Rogues Galleries of all time. Do you agree with the list? Did you enjoy it? What do you think is the best Rogues Gallery? Please put your opinions in the comments. Also, if you want, do the top 5 villains from your said Rogues Gallery. Until then, this has been the Steven Hour. Tune us into the next video, and until then, so long for now, ladies and gentlemen, and enjoy the rest of your day.